Welcome to Between the Before and After, a podcast about the stories that shape us. I'm your host, Coach John McLernan, and each episode I bring you an inspiring guest with a moving story that shines a light on the power of the human spirit. Before we dive in, I want to let you know about two very important things. Number one, the stories shared here are often gritty, raw, and vulnerable, and very likely will include speaking about sensitive topics suited for a mature audience. Number two, this podcast is also broadcast live on YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook. So on whatever platform you follow myself or Freedom Nutrition Coaching, you have the opportunity to participate in this discussion during the live stream. And we encourage your participation both by commenting and asking questions. And so this podcast is about exploring the stories that take place between the before and after photos, not just in the realm of weight loss, but in all areas of life. So let's dive in. All right, welcome back to Between the Before and After. This is a very special episode because I am now interviewing the other half of the story, if I could put it that way. I have with me Meg Hepner, wife of James, who I interviewed on season 3, episode 25. He's got quite a remarkable story. And I asked James if he would be comfortable, or if his wife would be comfortable sharing her side of the story, because she has an amazing, incredible story herself, including navigating that stretch of life together with James. So welcome to the show, Meg.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. And what a beautiful thing that you're doing here, just showcasing people's stories, because we all have a story. And it's such a beautiful thing to be able to share, because people can relate and hear little tidbits of resources that can help them out. So I think you're doing an incredible thing here.
Well, thank you. I think human beings are wired to learn from stories, and I'm just an inherently curious guy, and I love knowing about people's stories, because it really, as I said in the title of my podcast, it's the stories that shape us. It shapes who we become, and good, bad, and ugly, all of the things that we go through. I say I've never met a remarkable person who had an easy life, and so when we can kind of embrace even all those difficult aspects of our story, it can become really, really powerful. So
I love that. It's beautiful.
So before we dive in, where are you at now, and what are you up to? Because we're going to then rewind the clock after that and show people how we got here.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm up in Vancouver, and we shared this before. You're kind of close to me. I live here with my husband. We've been married for 22 years. People who listened to James's episode, they'll be able to kind of get a fuller picture of who we are. And personally, I love to walk with women who have sort of done all the things you're supposed to do, right? You know this. We're all told, hey, this is the life that you're supposed to live, and here are all the, the different markers that you have to hit. And many of us hit them and then all of a sudden go, oh crap, they're not as fulfilling as we thought they were going to be, right? We're sort of left with this image of, oh, we're going to be so happy. So my job is to work with women who go, I did all the right things. I became that person I was supposed to be. And guess what? I need to rebuild, because this isn't the ultimately fulfilling life that I thought it was going to be. So I help women deconstruct the life that they constructed and then reshape it and rebuild a life that's a better reflection of who they are. And to me, this is the work of, my lifetime. I love it so much, because I do feel like you say we're all in these stories, and eventually we have to go, wait, I need to create a story on my terms. So that's the work that I do that I absolutely adore.
I think that's absolutely amazing. And I believe a lot of this is connected to your own personal story and the things you've been through. And I do find this a lot in the coaching space, that when somebody is doing something really powerful and amazing, there's usually quite a story behind how you got to that place. So if we go all the way back, your parents are immigrants to Canada. Is that right?
Yeah, my parents came from Mexico. We're not Mexican, which is sort of weird, because we immigrated from Mexico, but we're not Mexican. We actually come from Europe, and my parents came out here, had no education, no money, no anything, and had to somehow survive and raise 4 kind of rambunctious, stubborn, crazy kids, and didn't have the resources to really know how to navigate all that kind of pressure. And so gave us the opportunity to have a very, what's the right word? I always try to think of what the right word is, because we all use dysfunctional, but gave us quite a dysfunctional beginning, but that was the beautiful breeding ground for also a lot of strengths that, I mean, I didn't see it at the time, but saw it later.
Yeah, as we look at it in hindsight, we look back and we go, I wouldn't take that out of my past, even though it's something I
Yeah.
wouldn't put up my hand to go through.
Yeah, totally.
And so I think what's really interesting is now, of course, you can look back with a very different lens doing what you do. And really, I think quite a compassionate one when you look at your parents and how they chose to cope with the difficulty of what they faced. And, I often look at
Mm.
compassion and I say it's not meant to be a get out of jail free card, but it allows us to look at what happened and to look at it through the lens of understanding as opposed to judgment. And from there, I think we find the ability to move forward. And so I think you had a pretty difficult childhood. Maybe I'm putting it
You know
mildly,
what?
or challenging, we
Yeah,
could say.
no, you know what? I love this question. Or this direction, because I think it's such an interesting thing. So for me, my dad was an alcoholic, right? That's
Hmm.
how he coped with the stress of his life. And my mom is what I affectionately call emotionally aggressive because she
Right.
was she was a lot, and she would come at you really, really hard, right? And I know now, looking back, um I didn't even know that that would have been considered abuse. I didn't know that that was considered a dysfunctional way of growing up. I assumed that that's just how everyone grew up. I assumed that everyone spent their weekends betting with their brothers when their dad would do his suicide thing, right? Because my dad would do
Wow.
this
Yeah.
thing where, yeah, like, I thought that was pretty normal, because my dad would do this thing where every weekend he would get really, really, really angry, and then he would run into the bathroom with a bottle or with a knife, and he would scream about how he was going to be committing suicide in there. And then our job was to line up outside the bathroom and try to convince him to not do that. And I just thought, like, everyone had some version of that in their family, and I had no idea that that was not normal. And it's interesting because as I grew up, I felt so much resentment towards my family. And now I feel sad because it was so much wasted time being resentful. But I guess it's the
Hmm.
human spirit, right? Or the human process, I should say, that we have to go through it. But looking back now, and even I got to this place in my early 20s. I'm in my early 40s now, but I got to this place in my early 20s where I looked at my dad and I went, all of these things that I thought were problems were his solutions, right? Like
Mm.
his drinking, his doing extreme things for attention, they were only a problem to me. To him, they were a solution. And so he was acting out his solution over and over and over and over again, never realizing that it was as painful as it was to us, because in his subconscious, it's a solution. So he's
Hmm.
thinking of
Hmm.
it as in, this is to protect himself. And he never thought about the damage it was doing to other people. And once I came to that realization, like, compassion is exactly what I felt. I thought, oh my God, like, this poor guy had no other coping skills. And it
Yeah.
was compassion for him. And then even my mom with her emotional aggression, as I like to call it, I spent so much of my life being upset that she wasn't the mother that I had wanted, that I had never had the opportunity to look at her as anything other than a mother. So
Hmm.
to me,
Hmm.
she was always just mom, 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 right? But she was a woman who was dealing with a very disappointing life, and
Yeah.
she had no coping skills as well. And I say this, and I know some people might not understand this, but I'm going to say it. As disappointed as I was in her, she was also just as disappointed in me.
Hmm.
And that bred compassion in me, because she thought, I'm going to have children and they're going to fulfill me. I'm going to have
Mm.
children and they're going to be the answer to my pain. And so when she looked at us, she thought, you were supposed to be the answer to my pain and you weren't. So she didn't realize what she was doing, but she was lashing out at us for not giving her that kind of relief that she had set up in her mind that we were going to be for her. And once I realized that, I'm like, how can you have anything other than compassion for someone who's
Mm.
experiencing life that way?
Yeah.
So I think that was an extremely eye-opening thing, which then led me to look at everyone else going, wait, all the ways that you're reacting are all just ways that you protect yourself. So then compassion becomes, I wouldn't say easier, but much, much easier. I don't know. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
I don't,
It does.
I'm
It
not
does.
sure if that's a,
No, it doesn't. It's a really, really beautiful way to look at it. And so I think, as you kind of went into, you mentioned like in your 20s, sort of having this realization, but what was it like? Where did you grow up, and kind of what was it like? Try, maybe when you get to high school and you start figuring out like, hey, you know what? Not everyone's family looks like this.
Yeah, you know what? I went on this is so embarrassing to say. I went on a very determined journey to turn my family into what I thought it was supposed to be.
Mm.
Because I went, and a lot of it happened actually when I met my husband. I met my husband when I was 16. Well, I met him when I was 13, but we started
Okay.
to date when I was 16. And I looked at his family, and from the outside, they looked so lovely. From the outside, they looked like they had it together. Now, having been in the family for many, many years, for 22 years, I obviously know that's
Yeah.
not legitimate. But in my little 16-year-old mind, I went, oh, a family could look like this. And so I looked at the behavior and I tried to superimpose it onto my family. And so I went,
Mm.
you must be this, you must be this, you must be this. And I tried to fix them. And that was extremely difficult because it puts a lot of pressure on someone who I didn't have the tools or the resources to fix
Yeah. Yeah.
anyone, but I thought I needed to. And so that was a fascinating thing because it was the situation James and I got ourselves into, right? James he looked at our family and went, oh, I could fix Meg and I could, be a part of fixing this family. And I looked at James and went, you could be my solution and your family could be the ideal, and having to realize, oh, it was not going to be like that um,
Yeah.
at
Yeah.
all was fun.
Yeah. Yeah. That's quite an adventure. So, you started dating at 16, and have
Yeah.
you been together like since that time? Wow.
Yeah, we've been together since I was 16. So, what am I? I'm 42 now. So, how many years? We've been married 22 years. And I guess we dated
So
4 years after
26.
that, or before that, 26 years. Yeah. Yeah.
That's
I've spent
remarkable.
more
So
of my
more
life
than
with
half your life.
him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what a
Totally.
journey. So at some point you discover this isn't working. Trying to fix my family isn't working, and things with James' family isn't all that it seems either. Was there
Yeah.
ever kind of like a sense of like maybe either frustration or confusion, like trying to figure out why isn't this working when it looks like it should work?
Yeah, you know what? It's a funny thing that you say that, and I think that this is something that's maybe prevalent, perhaps prevalent in the self-help industry, right? Like we go, this is wrong. This is what right would look like. Now we want to jump that. We want to fix it. And when it doesn't work, we go, well, what's wrong? What is like, how am I not fixing this? And then we put this
Mm,
pressure on, well, I must not be good enough yet. And this is how self-help or the personal development industry can actually be more of harm than it can be a help. Because I went, if I just got better, if I just got
right.
smarter, if I just got whatever, then I could fix other people's problems. And what it actually was is if I could just let go of my expectations, if I could just
Mm,
fully accept what is, if I could envelop my family in grace without needing them to change, if I could learn to love what is, that is actually what in the end really
mm.
changed. I was going to jokingly say fixed things, but it only fixed it in me because they're still as crazy as always.
Yeah.
They're still madness. I'm going to tell you this. My sweet, lovely family, I don't live close to them anymore. They're still absolutely insane. But it fixed me. And again,
Yeah.
jokingly, I say fixed because now, like, I call my mom every Sunday. I love her dearly. And
Yeah.
all of
Yeah.
her emotional aggression, I don't view it the same way. Like my dad is still an alcoholic. I love him dearly. I still talk with him as often as he can kind of handle. And there isn't this like you need to be different. But what I really
Hmm.
needed to do was felt very counterintuitive. It felt like just get all the different kinds of strategies and everything that you need in order
Yeah.
to fix them. And counterintuitively it was accept them. Don't try to change them. Allow them to
Right.
be who they are.
Right. Because we really can't change people. I think
No.
that's, you mentioned the self-help industry, and both of us involved in coaching as well. And it's really interesting when we come to a place as a coach and we realize it's not actually my job to change people. In fact, it's really disempowering to the individual to say, I'm going to change you because you're not able to do this yourself. Like I kind of chuckle now because I'm like,
Yeah.
that, when I first started coaching, that was this idea, was I'm going to like change people. And it's like, well, no, that's not actually how this process works. We come to this place where we realize that we just, it sounds cliche, but like we create space and opportunity and invite them to be, to go through the change process and to be there with them as they go through it. And so, but one of the challenges is, of course, when it comes to people that we're emotionally very close to, we like it's impossible to coach them, for example. Like it's something we can't do, so we have to like let go of that idea that, and just say, as you said, accept them as they are here and now, be there in whatever capacity is appropriate for them, and then kind of let go and accept what is and let them go on their journey. And maybe one day they come to this place where I don't want to keep living like this anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting because I thought it was hard with my parents and my siblings. It was twice as hard when I had to do that with James, because
Yeah.
James and I got into this situation where his gift, the gift of his family, was to show me there's another way of living. But inside of his family, there was a lot of, you need to be successful, you need to have it all together, you need to look appropriate, like you look like you're successful, you look like all of these different things. And so there was this, whereas my family was freakishly dysfunctional, his family was plagued with perfectionism, right? Which are both
Right.
very, very, very unhealthy. It's just one of them is more acceptably healthy, right? It's a little bit like if
Yeah.
you, right? Like if you're, let's say you're addicted to drugs, that's everyone in society goes, oh, that's terrible, you're addicted to drugs, what a terrible addiction. If you're addicted to work, everyone goes, oh my God, look how successful you are, aren't you lovely? No, it's the exact same thing. You're trying to fill a need because you don't feel like something is fundamentally wrong inside of how you're feeling, and you're filling it with something. It's just that we look at the people who are filling it appropriately and we applaud, and then we look at the people who are filling it inappropriately and we go, oh, well, you're messed up, right? But it's actually the same behavior. And so that was actually true in James and my family. They were both very, very unhealthy. It's just one looked so much prettier than the other one did. And so James got to a point, and I'm sure, you heard his story. And so I'll give it just a tiny little, a little context. Is he felt like he had to be successful at everything and that he had to look like he has it all together. And then something happened in our business that was actually not a big deal. It's something every business person probably goes through, but to him, it was evidence of his failure, and it crushed him. And so we had been married for, I think it was probably 10 years by then. We had 2 children, and he just decided to check out and just not be interested in it wasn't that he wasn't interested. He felt like he was incapable of taking care of the children. He wasn't working. Most people would call it a depression, right? He went into 3 years where he just sort of disappeared. And I kind of fell back into I got to fix this thing, right? Like I got to fix this. I got to fix this. And so I tried to fix it for him. And I remember one of the things that we did to fix him was we took him to a Tony Robbins event. And I was sitting at this Tony Robbins event. And again, this was in 2012. So it was quite a number of years ago. But I was sitting in there and I went, holy crap, like I'm changing. Like I can tell I'm changing. I'm getting ideas. Tony was very powerful for me in that time of my life. And James was not having it. And for some reason, I remember it was Tony's Date with Destiny program. It was relationship day. And I thought, well, I need this because right now our relationship is really, really difficult. I've got to go down to relationship day. And I thought, oh, so does James. Like this will be great for our relationship. And I went up into the hotel room and I said, honey, like it's relationship day, blah, blah, blah. And he just went, oh, I can't. I'm just too depressed. I'm just too this. I'm just too that. And I guess it was just the right time and the right place and the right environment, and everything just clicked for me. And I went, I can't change him either. And I remember saying to him, you know what, babe, you want to stay here? That's totally fine. You do that. You are more than welcome to stay here. I'm going to go live my life. And living my life means going downstairs and participating in this. So, and I say this kind of jokingly, God bless you, but I'm out, not out as in the relationship, but I'm out as in trying to influence you. And it was that moment that he went, oh shit, she's going to go. I better follow. And so he went, no one's going to fix it for me. No one's going to baby me and take, or not baby, but take care of me and like whatever. And he went, well, then I'm going to go. So it was probably about a half hour later that he went downstairs. And in making that decision, his life was transformed, because in that moment that I went, I won't change you. He went, so then I'm responsible. And that was probably the healthiest moment we had ever had in our relationship. Yeah. Even though it was so difficult.
And at that point in time, how many years or how long had it been since you had fallen into this depression?
3 years.
So you're going through 3 years of your partner, this person that you love more than anybody else in the world. You've been with them for a number of years to watch them. And my wife watched me go through something somewhat similar, actually. Did you ever have thoughts of like, I don't want to do this anymore. I want to leave this relationship?
Yeah, you know what? So it's interesting that you say that, because there probably were, but I had watched my mom suffer so long with my dad that this wasn't immediately evidence, I'm out of here. Like it wasn't,
right.
Like I would have put up with a lot before I would have gone, I'm out of here,
Right.
And so it's funny how, there probably were times, but it's also funny how the relationship mirrored my parents' relationship, because like I would go in, I remember when James was at his worst, and I would have left to go grocery shopping or have done something. And then I would come home and I would leave the kids in the car, and I would come in just to make sure he hadn't self-harmed before I'd bring the kids in. And it was very reminiscent of a trauma I'd had in my past. And so it didn't freak me out. It kind of felt normal again, which is very strange, but it felt a little bit normal. Like, this is part of life. And so I wasn't, in some ways that was a gift, because I wasn't as freaked out about it. I'm like, okay, well, now we're dealing with this. I kind of had that.
Yeah.
But definitely there were certain times when I got really upset. And where I got upset was when I noticed he didn't put effort into the kids. That was very difficult for me, because I'm like, I didn't want my kids to grow up with the same type of father I had had. And so if I was ever like, oh, dude, I'm out of here, it was mostly because I saw him neglecting them, and I went, that makes me so angry. So that's probably the moments that I thought of that.
Yeah, but there's something to be said for sticking it through a difficult time. Because I think you would probably say on the other side of it is a really powerful, remarkable relationship. And I feel for a lot of people, and this isn't to make anybody feel ashamed if their relationship doesn't work and they choose to go their separate ways. But in a sense, I feel for a lot of people, because I think we've been conditioned to say, hey, if it gets tough, just leave. That's kind of what we've been taught. And it's like, well, there's another possibility here. Maybe I can put it that way. There's another possibility if you're willing to actually endure the difficult time, and that is that there's probably a really remarkable relationship on the other side of that.
Well, and I think intimacy is created when you have these struggles, right? Because like you're going to go through life with your partner, and you're going to experience things you're not going to experience with anyone else, right? Like, and that's the intimacy of a marriage. Like every single thing we're doing, we're kind of going through it together. And there's an intimacy in going through really difficult times, where you don't necessarily have that with someone else, because you're always a little bit outside of it, right? Like if you know a couple that's struggling, you're on the outside supporting, but you're not in it. They're in it, right? And so it's a very intimate thing, and I think it's the breeding ground for what love truly is. Now, I want to be very clear. If you're in an abusive relationship, if there's harm in your relationship, no, you should get yourself to safety. So I'm not talking about that, right? Because sometimes we can hear these things and we can go, oh, so what they're saying is I should stay in an abusive relationship because intimacy is created there. No, absolutely not. Any type of emotional aggression, any type of physical abuse, you 100% need to get yourself to safety. That's a different type of thing that we're talking about here. We're talking about two people who loved each other, but were really struggling with life. And so when I looked at, because here's what we're taught. We're taught that we're going to find someone and they're going to complete us, right? Like that stupid Jerry Maguire movie, right? Like worst movie ever. I mean, super, super cute. But that line, "You complete me," like, ugh, we all should have been revolted at that, because that is a sign of real unhealth. Do you know what we think it's
Mm-mm.
very romantic and it's sweet, but it's actually extremely unhealthy. Because what you're doing, if you say something like "you complete me," is you're saying, I'm putting you in charge of my happiness and my okayness. And you as a human being better not mess up, and you will. So we're really setting up our partner to fail, right? All those stupid wedding quotes where it's just like happily ever after and all this crap. I'm like, oh, you guys are so gonna struggle, because that's not what real love is. Real love, I mean, it's part of love,
Mm-hmm,
right?
mm-hmm.
That little sweet, like, oh my gosh, you completely, like, that's very cute. But there comes a point in time when you go, I hate your guts. I see all of your bad stuff. I
Yeah.
freaking want to kill you. If you fall asleep, I'm going to smother you with a pillow. Like, that's how you feel about your spouse.
Yeah.
And then you go, and I'm still willing to stick it out with you. Oh, this is a different kind of love. This
Mm-mm.
is a different kind of love. It's a love that is like, as dorky as this is going to be to say, but it's a love that's forged through the fire. And you go like,
Mm-hmm.
now you're my ride and die. When it's like, you complete me, it's like, well,
I'm here for the good
you
times.
know, I'm here for the good times. But when you go like, I have seen you at your worst, and I have felt like I wanted to completely reject you, and I still stayed, that trust that you then have in one another, and that ability to go, no, you are my person, is something that unfortunately we don't exalt in our society, and we should. We really
Mm.
should go like, that's the part of love that's so beautiful. But instead, we just do the "you complete me" crap, the surface crap, because
Yeah.
it's the dopamine stuff, you know?
Right, right. The romantic comedy version, or the Disney
Yeah.
sort of version of like happily ever after. And it's kind of like, I work in the realm of weight loss coaching, and I try to, I have to sort of meet people where they're at, but also let them know that, hey, you know what, there really isn't a happily ever after, in a sense that this is something you have to keep working on as life goes on.
Mm.
The work changes, but like my wife and I, we made an agreement that we were never going to go to bed angry at each other.
Yeah.
Lots of times I wanted to break that agreement, but my wife didn't. She's very stubborn. So, um,
In the best way, obviously.
of course. And so, we've had some late nights, even all nighters.
Mm.
But what it taught us was like this ability, like we have two choices. Either we're going to work through this and figure out some kind of resolution to this, or we're done. So we go, well, what do I want?
Mm.
Ultimately, I still want to be with you. So if that's the choice that I'm making, then we got to come to a conclusion. We got to come to some kind of resolution here. It's probably going to involve compromise and sacrifice, but learning how to do that is just incredibly, incredibly powerful. And now we got a sweet little boy, and he's like,
Mm.
and it was a number of years before we had kids, and so, but I think now it's like he's super awesome and fun, other than when he's melting down.
Mm.
But even then, we're like super patient with him,
Yeah.
right? But yeah,
Oh,
so,
that's
but it's
beautiful.
this,
Mine are 17. No,
yeah.
sorry, go ahead, please.
I was going to say, just this idea, this willingness to work through the difficult times, and kind of, I think it was just being confronted with that realization that it was like, okay, either I stay mad at you forever and leave you, or
Hmm.
we figure something out and keep this working. And the more times we
Yeah.
figured something out, it just got just a smidgen easier. And you know what, and you've hit on something super important, that like letting go of like, she's not responsible for my happiness and I'm not responsible for her happiness, but being together like brings us a lot of joy. But
Yeah.
when we take that burden of expectation off of the partner, it changes the dynamic of the relationship in a really, really amazing way.
Yeah, I remember when James and I first got married, I always say, you are not responsible for the other person, but you are responsible to the other person.
Mm.
So I think to myself, when James and I first got married and he would come home and he would be upset, I would think that I had to modify myself in order to make him happy. So it didn't matter what I had gone through during the day. It didn't matter, what my struggles were, what my emotions were. He was suffering, so put a smile on your face, be happy, cook him a meal, talk about something he likes, solve his problems, do all these things for him. And that was me thinking I was responsible for him and for our
Mm.
relationship. When you switch to I'm responsible to the relationship, it means, hey, honey, I see you're struggling. Why don't you figure out what you need to do to make yourself feel better? And I'll be like the assistant. You know what I mean? So like once you know what you need to do, let me help make an environment that you can do that. But I'm not responsible for figuring out what's going to make you feel better. I'm not responsible for making sure you take the actions that make you feel better. I'm simply responsible for saying this environment will support you as you take care of yourself. Right? Which is a completely different way of doing it. So now if he comes home, he goes, oh, I've had a hard day. I'm like, well, what's going to make you feel better? And how can I help you in that? Not how do I modify myself to make everything pleasant so that your happiness is reliant on me. But you may also make a very good point when you talk about you and your wife and going like, I want to stay with you or I leave. I think as we live, especially in North America, so your listeners may be all over the world, but in North America, we are based on a very individualistic type of mindset where it's the individual, right? If you look at, we all want to be the self-made man, or we all go like, you got to do it on pull yourself up by your bootstraps and just work harder, as if your own effort is going to take you somewhere. Like your own effort might take you somewhere, but it's the connections and the support of your community that takes you so much further. And when we get married, if we get married or are in a relationship and we still have that individualistic lifestyle or mindset, it's going to be, well, I matter more than the relationship does. And when you're in partnership with someone, you don't matter more than the relationship. The relationship is priority. Who are we together is a priority over who am I as an individual. And most people don't like to hear that. And that's fine. You don't have to like to hear that. Go into a relationship and be the individual and see what happens. You will be miserable. They will not work because marriage or relationship is all about compromise. Now the relationship has become the most important thing. And how do I best support the relationship becomes the ultimate goal, not how do I, because you see this all the time in men who go, oh, I still want to be free. I want to go out with the guys and I want to go and do this and I want to go do that. And I don't, who cares that I have a wife and kids at home? That's the individual in a relationship. Or you have women who go, I want to be able to, say everything I want to do and express and be upset and blah, 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 blah. And it's like, no, you're not an individual anymore. You gave that up to be in a relationship. So now you're part of a team and what's best for the team. Sometimes what's best for the team is not to constantly self-express everything you feel. And sometimes it's to go, some of the freedoms I used to have, I no longer can participate in. And we give those up to be together. But unfortunately not,
Well, no,
that's
here's
not
the challenge.
Popular.
Right. And it's not popular, not because it's not a wonderful thing, but because it's been framed as a problem.
Yeah.
As though like self-made person is like the biggest myth that's ever been sold and probably one of the most destructive ones. I have to do this all by myself. Like, no, get all the help and support you can in whatever avenues you can because life is hard. Life is a challenge.
Yeah.
And we are wired to learn and connect with other human beings. And so to isolate yourself and then say, I'm going to be, it's a very sort of insecure, ego-based way of operating where it's like, if I accept help from somebody else, somehow I'm less than. I'm like, no, you're human. That's what it is. But thinking from a relationship standpoint, what often gets missed is, because we hear about, okay, it involves sacrifice to make a relationship work. But it's like the sum is greater than the parts. What you get on the outside of that is far more than you could ever have as an individual. And I think that's, you would probably agree and say like, what you and James have now as a result of it, all the different trials by fire that you really went through is something that all the money in the world couldn't buy.
Absolutely. And I think that we don't realize that. Like we think that and this is part of, and again, like I'm a pretty, I'm not a pretty big critique of, but I do critique the self-help industry, which I am a part of, right? But I do critique it because it does say to you, self-expression is the most important thing, right? Who are you? Who is your authentic self? That's who you need to find and then be that person. And that's true and that's good. But if you're sacrificing the community in order to be the individual, that can sometimes be very detrimental to you as the individual because you need community, right? We somehow believe we don't need community, that if we find our authentic self, we will be so happy that who cares about community? And that's not how the human being works. The human being is designed to be part of community. And I'll tell you what, there's a reason we have community. It's because we are such our egos can get so out of control that we need a community to give us some boundaries. Now, here's the thing. Some boundaries need to be fought against, okay? So I'm a huge advocate for the LGBTQ community. I'm a huge advocate for the trans community, for the Black Lives Matter community. I advocate for those things because some barriers need to be broken. Some boundaries are crap and we need to get rid of them, right? But there are other boundaries that are very, very good for the human being. If you don't have it, your ego will go so massively out of control. We're meant to be social so that we can create an ego that is kind, compassionate, loving, and good, because we don't just think of ourselves, we also think of the other. If we are only self-focused, what you begin to do is you begin to create this environment where you think only your needs matter and everyone must change for you to feel comfortable, right? And we see this in society where we're fighting. So we're Canadian, thank the Lord we're Canadian, but I'm teasing because Canada has a bunch of problems too. But you look at the Americans and you go, you must be a Republican or you're just a crap human being. You must be a Democrat or you're just a crap human being. Like you have these huge egos, like this huge hubris and unhealthy self-esteem that you, for some reason, have all the smarts to know exactly how the world should be run without any humility of going, maybe you in your disagreement know something I don't know and you could teach me if I could just open up. Even if I end up disagreeing with you massively, if I could just open up to your perspective, to your point of view, I could learn something and call you still a fellow human being instead of the enemy. But we're unwilling to do that, you know. And
it would be a sidetrack, but I think we get a little bit played as well if we're not aware that this is the process that's taking place, right? We where does the messaging come from that you have to be this or that? And I think about I think a lot of behavior I could perhaps call it childish. So because I've got a little toddler, right, and he's really only aware of his own needs. And so when his needs aren't met, he lets us know in no uncertain terms. So as parents, we're trying to guide him through this stage where, he doesn't want to eat that, but he'll eat this other thing. And if we try to, offer him this, well, it's going to be a meltdown. Or if the spoon color is wrong or things like that, he hasn't. Now, of course, we're trying to guide him to become a good human being over these next few years. But I see this happening in adult form as well, where exactly that, where my needs are supreme above all other needs, and if they're not met, so like this misplaced sense of entitlement. And again, but it's sold as though that is the ideal. This is what you should expect from life, as opposed to community is so much better, so much more enjoyable, and certain boundaries are just about behaving like a decent human being instead of a petulant toddler.
Totally. You have a lot of people who are walking around with adult bodies but child mindsets. 100%, right? As if we're all the cowboy riding off into the sunset, out to do it on our own. But the truth of the matter is, if you look at what happens when you're on your own, take, for example, the most extreme example of being on your own, which would be solitary confinement, right? People walk into solitary confinement if they're imprisoned and they go into solitary confinement, they go in at least somewhat sane, right? Depending on the situation, but somewhat sane. Most people, if they have to spend years and years and years in solitary confinement, will lose their sanity. Why? Because they're alone. They have no one to interact with. They have no community. They are completely on their own. And what happens is they slowly deteriorate into insanity. And there was this study done by someone, and I wish I had remembered all the details, but he said he was watching these men who had been in solitary confinement for years and years and years, and they would be let out into the yard. And instead of enjoying the yard and going, oh, okay, I have my outside freedom time, they would defecate all over everything. They would get naked and roll into the dirt and just act like animals. And it was because they had spent so much time alone. So if you want to know what a self-made man looks like, a man who does it on his own, who lets no one in, it's actually insanity. It's not, we like to think of, Elon Musk or whatever as, oh, that's a self-made man. No, that's a supported man. A man who thinks he's going to do it on himself is what solitary confinement creates. A man who is on the brink of insanity, thinking only of his most basic human needs. What do I have to eat, drink, and what, all of that kind of stuff. So I think our world needs a massive a shakeup in what we value and what we think is important.
Yeah, I think you're right. We need to really celebrate community and celebrate human connection, and in a way that makes it clear to people that this is a more enjoyable way of living. Like,
Yeah.
and I go back to, because yes, it does involve sacrifice, but it's like everything involves sacrifice. We might think being a self-made person doesn't involve sacrifice. I'm like, oh yeah, you're giving up a lot to try to fit into this ideal that you think is going to make you happy, which in turn it won't, because of all of the amazing things that you give up. And so, yeah, I think that's really, really powerful. Well, Meg, you're a tremendous force for good. You've got a lot of wonderful things to share. I really, really appreciate you also being willing to come on and share some of the difficult parts of your own story that have led you to where you are now. If people want to connect with you, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Absolutely. No, that's fantastic. So I have a website. It's just meghepner.com. Super easy to find. You can connect with me through that. I'm just the typical mom where I'm on Facebook. So I'm on Facebook. I'm not on any other social media. My kids are very quick to tell me I'm on the mom social media. So I'm on Facebook, but I'm not on anything else. One. But you can gladly. It's the good
440
one.
40
exactly.
plus, yeah.
Totally. So you can connect with me on Facebook, but those are two fantastic ways to reach out.
You know, and I mean, it's been such a rich conversation today, a lot to really take in. If we were to try to, I'm going to put the pressure on you and say, if you were to try to condense like what we've discussed today into sort of one maybe actionable nugget of wisdom for people to take away, what would you like people to take away from hearing this today?
Oh, yeah. You know what? That's such a great question. I think it might be two things. So I'll kind of try to connect.
We'll permit two things today, just for you.
Well, okay. Okay, perfect. Thank you for making the exception. The one thing when I look at my early life in the beginning of our conversation, I felt so powerless. And so what I would love to tell people is that you are way more powerful than you think, that your actions matter. I think sometimes people don't think that. We think we are a product of our environment. No, you are the creator of your reality. So really looking at your power dynamics and realizing how very, very powerful you are. But that power doesn't come through control, but power comes through letting go, I think would be one massive thing that I would love for people to know. And then the second thing would be, you can be powerful in community without having to give up yourself. Because sometimes we think if the self, if we're in community, we have to give up ourselves. No, whatever kind of person or individual you are that person in community. Nothing excludes you from community. So learn to embrace your community and use your power in community, because it will lead you to the most fulfilling life you will ever have.
That's an amazing note to finish on. Well, thank you so much. We could just capture that as a soundbite and, send it out to the interwebs. So well, Meg, thank you so much for coming on today. It's been such a pleasure, and it's really interesting to hear how yours and James' story have woven together, but also to hear your individual story as well and how you've navigated that. So again, I super appreciate that. Thank you.
Oh, thanks for having me, John. I appreciate it, and I'm so grateful you're doing what you're doing.
Thank you so much for tuning in to Between the Before and After. If you've enjoyed this episode, please like, share, subscribe, or leave a review, because that helps this podcast to reach and inspire more people. I love exploring the stories that take place between the before and after, the powerful experiences that shape who we become. And I love human potential. I love the possibilities that lie within us. So whatever you may be up against, I hope these stories inspire you, because if you're still here, your story's not done yet, so keep moving forward.
Anyone can come from any place of brokenness and destitution and build an amazing life.